What if the person who vowed to protect you became the one who publicly tried to destroy you? What if the proof that clears your name exposes a secret your in-laws have hidden for years? And what if the baby they called a mistake was the only witness? Stay until the end, because the reason he filed for divorce on Christmas isn't what you expect. When I open my evidence folder, every face in the room goes pale. My name is Harper Delaney. I am a 32-year-old structural engineer who deals in load-bearing walls and stress fractures for a living. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment the foundation of my own life collapsed. It was Christmas Eve in Maple Ridge, Ohio. The snow was falling in thick, silent clumps that muffled the sound of my tires crunching up the long, winding driveway of my in-laws' house. I checked the dashboard clock. I was exactly 40 minutes early. Usually arriving early to the Rivers family estate was a mistake, because my mother-in-law Diane would still be frantically arranging the terrifyingly perfect porcelain village on the mantel. But tonight I did not care. I had driven 500 miles from Chicago with a secret burning a hole in the pocket of my wool coat. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, the silence of the car pressing in on my ears. My hand drifted to my pocket, fingers brushing the crushed velvet of a small navy blue jewelry box. Inside, nestled where a pair of diamond earrings or a necklace might usually sit, were 3 plastic sticks, 3 positive pregnancy tests after 2 years of failed treatments, endless negative results, and the kind of heartbreak that feels like a hollow ache in your bones. It has happened naturally, miraculously. I had conceived while away on the lakefront Meridian Tower project in Chicago. I had pictured this moment 1,000 times on the drive down. I would walk in, pull my husband Cole aside, maybe under the mistletoe or just in a quiet corner of the kitchen, and I would place the box in his hands. I would watch the confusion turned to realization, and then to the joy we had both stopped believing was possible. I grabbed the stack of wrapped gifts from the passenger seat, balancing them precariously against my chest, and stepped out into the biting cold. The air smelled of wood smoke and impending snow. I keyed the front door open quietly, balancing the gifts, and stepped into the foyer. The house was aggressively warm and smelled intensely of cinnamon brooms and roasting turkey. It was the smell of safety. It was the smell of family. I kicked off my boots, leaving them on the rubber mat, and moved in my socks across the hardwood floor. The television was on in the living room, the low drone of a football game providing background noise, but the voices were coming from the kitchen down the long hallway to my left. I was halfway down the hall, a smile already forming on my lips when I heard my name. It was the tone that stopped me. It was not affectionate. It was not even casual. It was a sound I had never heard come out of my husband's mouth in 5 years of marriage. It was a low, bitter sneer, dripping with a poison so potent it made my steps falter. I froze. Instinct, sharp and sudden, told me to flatten myself against the wall just outside the archway where the light from the kitchen spilled onto the floorboards. "She is obviously pregnant," Mom, Cole said. His voice was shaking, but not with excitement. It was shaking with rage. "And let me be crystal clear about this. It is not mine." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the wrapped presents so hard the paper crinkled under my fingers. The sound loud in my own ears, but they did not hear it. "Cole, honey, are you sure?" Diane's voice was trembling, hesitant. "Harper has wanted this for so long." "Baby, stop," Cole snapped. The violence in that single word made me flinch. "Do not defend her. I have the proof. I have been tracking the charges on the joint account." She thought I wasn't watching. 3 separate charges to the Riverline Women's Health Center in Chicago. A prenatal ultrasound charge from 2 days ago. She's been sneaking around for weeks. My stomach dropped. A physical sensation like falling down an elevator shaft. He had seen the charges. Of course, he had seen the charges. We shared everything. I had used the joint card because I had nothing to hide. Because I was building a surprise. Because I wanted him to see the financial history of our miracle when I explained it all to him. "She is sleeping with her boss," Cole continued, his voice gaining a terrifying confident momentum. "Owen Mallister, that slick architect she worships. She has been spending 12 hours a day at that studio. Late nights, weekend site visits, and now she is pregnant." I could not breathe. Owen Mallister was 60 years old. He was happily married to a yoga teacher named Brooke who sent me homemade granola. He treated me like the daughter he never had. The idea was so ludicrous, so vile that I almost laughed out loud. But the laugh died in my throat as Cole kept talking. I already spoke to Vince this morning, Cole said. The name of the family attorney hung in the air like smoke. Vince says we have her dead to rights, Cole told them. And I could hear the sound of him pacing, his footsteps heavy on the tile. The infidelity clause in the prenup is ironclad. If I prove she stepped out, she gets nothing. No alimony, no claim on the house, nothing. You filed, Leonard. My father-in-law spoke for the first time. His voice was not shocked. It was grim, satisfied. The voice of a man closing a business deal. Good. You have to protect the family assets. Cole, you did the right thing. I filed this morning. Cole confirmed. The papers are already drawn up. Vince arranged for a process server. He's going to be here at 7:30 this evening. I looked down at my watch. It was 6:50. Here, Diane whispered. Cole on Christmas Eve, in front of everyone. Especially in front of everyone, Cole said, and the cruelty in his voice turned my blood to ice. If we do it privately, she will spin it. She will cry. She will manipulate the story. I want her served when Noah and Emma are here. I want the whole family to see her face when she realizes she cannot lie her way out of this. I want her humiliated. Mom, it is the least she deserves for trying to pass off another man's bastard as a Rivers. The velvet box in my pocket felt like it weighed a 100 lb. It pressed against my ribs, a physical reminder of the truth that was currently being twisted into a weapon to destroy me. Every detail he cited was real, my exhaustion. The late nights working on the structural retrofit, the clinic appointments, but the narrative he had wrapped around them was a nightmare I did not recognize. I wanted to storm into that kitchen. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the pregnancy tests on the island and demand he look at the dating, demand he look at me, but I stopped. If I walked in there now crying and screaming, I would look exactly like the hysterical, guilty woman he had already painted me to be. He had the home field advantage. He had his parents. He had a lawyer. He had a process server coming in 40 minutes to ambush me. If I walked in there now, I would lose. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But my mind, trained to analyze structural failures and collapse points, suddenly went cold and still. I needed to stabilize the structure before I could repair it. Or perhaps I needed to let it collapse so I could rebuild it on my own terms. My fingers moved on autopilot. I pulled my phone from my pocket, dimmed the screen, and typed a text message to Cole. Flight delayed. I will be about 45 minutes late. The snow is terrible coming out of the city. Start without me. Love you. I hit send. 3 seconds later, I heard his phone ding on the granite counter in the kitchen. Speak of the devil, Cole muttered. I held my breath. She says she is delayed, Cole said, and then he let out a short, disgusted snort that sounded like he was spitting something foul out of his mouth. Another lie. She is probably frantically deleting texts from her lover before she walks in the door. Let her take her time. The process server will be here waiting. Just act normal when she gets here, Leonard instructed. Do not tip her off. I can't even look at her, Cole said. That broke me. That was the structural failure, the beam snapping under the weight. I did not step into the kitchen. I did not announce my presence. I turned around, my socks sliding silently on the wood, and walked back toward the front door. I placed the stack of gifts I'd been carrying. The cashmere sweater for Diane, the vintage whiskey for Leonard, the watch for Cole on the entryway table. I shoved my feet back into my boots, not bothering to lace them fully. I opened the front door, the cold air hitting my flushed face like a slap. I stepped out into the snow, leaving a fresh set of boot prints next to the ones I had made coming in. I got back into my car, my hands shaking so badly it took me 2 tries to get the key in the ignition. As I reversed down the driveway, leaving the warm cinnamon-scented house and the husband, who was currently eagerly awaiting my public execution, one thought pounded in my head, louder than the engine, louder than the heartbreak. You think you have written the ending to this story, Cole. You think you are the hero uncovering the villain? I touched the velvet box in my pocket one last time. You will not get to write this story alone. I turned onto the main road and drove into the dark to understand how I ended up standing in the snow outside my in-laws' house with my life in tatters. You have to go back 6 weeks. You have to go back to the wind-battered streets of Chicago and the steel skeleton of the lakefront Meridian Tower. This was supposed to be my magnum opus. It was a massive seismic retrofit and restoration of a historic high-rise. A project with a budget of $40 million and the kind of technical complexity that makes structural engineers salivate. I had fought hard for the lead engineer role, and when I got it, I packed my bags for a 2-month residency in the city, convinced that this job was going to be the thing that finally made me feel whole. At Eveline Urban Studio, the boutique firm managing the design, I reported directly to Owen Mallister. If Cole had ever bothered to meet Owen, or even look him up on LinkedIn, he would have seen a man who looked nothing like a homewrecker. Owen was 62, with thinning gray hair, thick spectacles, and a voice that never rose above a library whisper. He treated me with the protective, slightly fussing demeanor of a favorite uncle. He was also obsessively loudly in love with his wife, Brooke. Brooke was a yogurt teacher who sent care packages of gluten-free muffins to the office and FaceTimed Owen every day at lunch to show him their golden retriever. Go home, Harper, Owen would tell me, tapping his watch when the clock struck 7 in the evening. The building has stood for 80 years. It will stand for one more night. Brooke says, you need to rest. I would laugh and pack up my bag, grateful for his kindness. But even with Owen chasing me out of the office, the exhaustion was heavy. It felt different than the usual project fatigue. It sat in my marrow. By the second week, my body began to revolt in strange, terrifying ways. I walked into the break room one Tuesday morning, and the smell of the fresh pot of dark roast coffee, a smell I usually worshipped, hit me like a chemical weapon. I gagged, dropping my portfolio on the table and rushing to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. I stared at myself in the mirror, pale and shaking, blaming the questionable sushi I had eaten the night before. 2 days later, I found myself weeping in my temporary apartment because of a television commercial about a dog that got separated from its owner's luggage at the airport. I sat on the floor sobbing uncontrollably, wondering if I was having a nervous breakdown. The breaking point came during a site inspection. I was walking along the catwalk on the 14th floor, clipped in and secure, looking at a riveted joint that needed reinforcement. Suddenly, the world narrowed to a pinprick. The sounds of the jackhammers and the wind off Lake Michigan faded into a high-pitched whine. My knees buckled. I grabbed the handrail, my knuckles turning white, and breathed through the wave of dizziness until the horizon stopped spinning. Stress, I told myself. It is just stress and 70-hour weeks. But then I checked my calendar app, and the realization hit me harder than a steel beam. I was late. Not just a day or two late, but a full week. I did not let myself hope. I could not. We had spent 2 years on the fertility roller coaster, clomid injections, timed intercourse, the monthly heartbreak of a single pink line. Our specialist back in Ohio, Dr. Evans, had looked us in the eye 6 months ago and gently suggested that natural conception was a statistical impossibility. Less than a 1% chance, he had said. Still, I found myself walking to a pharmacy 3 blocks from the office, terrified that someone would see me. I bought a box of tests. Then, paranoid that the cashier was judging me, I walked another 4 blocks to a different drugstore and bought a different brand. Then a third. Back in my apartment, I lined them up on the bathroom counter. I waited the requisite 3 minutes, pacing the small bath mat, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Positive, positive, positive. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and stared at them until my vision blurred. I touched the little plastic windows, half expecting the lines to vanish under my fingertips. They stayed. We had done it against every statistic, against the stress, against the odds. My body had done the one thing I thought it was broken for. The next morning, I called Riverline Women's Health Center. I did not use a fake name. I did not pay with cash. I gave them my insurance card and pulled out the joint credit card I shared with Cole to pay the copay. Why would I hide it? It was our money. It was our baby. You are about 8 weeks along. the doctor told me later that week, pointing to a tiny fluttering beam on the grainy black and white monitor. Strong heartbeat. Everything looks perfectly healthy. 8 weeks. That meant conception had happened right before I left for Chicago. I walked out of that clinic into the biting Chicago wind, clutching the ultrasound photo inside my coat like it was a diamond. My thumb hovered over Cole's contact on my phone. I wanted to call him. I wanted to scream it through the receiver, but then I stopped. I thought about the last 2 years, the tears, the clinical unromantic nature of our sex life when we were trying, the way Cole's face would fall every month when I told him not this time. I did not want to tell him over a grainy video call with a bad connection. I did not want this moment to be digital. I wanted to be in the same room. I wanted to put the tests and the ultrasound in a box, wrap it in velvet, and watch the realization wash over him. I wanted to hold him while we cried happy tears. I wanted to give him the best Christmas present of his life. I will wait, I promised myself, just a few more weeks. It was a beautiful, romantic thought. It was also the mistake that would cost me everything. While I was in Chicago nursing my secret miracle, things back home were beginning to rot. Cole was not doing well. He was managing the construction of a massive distribution center in Phoenix remotely, and the project was plagued with delays. Every time we spoke, he looked more tired, his eyes rimmed with dark circles. But it wasn't just work. It was the pressure of being a Rivers. Leonard Rivers, my father-in-law, was a man who did not believe in good enough. He believed in dominance. And lately, Cole was failing to dominate. The real blow came over Thanksgiving. I was stuck in Chicago, working through the holiday to meet a deadline, so Cole had gone to his parents' house alone. When we spoke on the phone that night, Cole's voice was flat. "Noah and Emma are pregnant," he said. My heart gave a sympathetic lurch. Noah was Cole's younger brother. He and Emma had been married for less than a year. It was the classic unfairness of the universe. They had probably not even been trying. "Oh, Cole," I said softly, "I am sorry. I know that is hard to hear." Dad made a toast. Cole continued, the bitterness seeping through the phone line. He said, "Thank God, at least one of my boys is doing his duty and giving me a legacy. Cole and Harper are too busy chasing skyscrapers and shipping warehouses to worry about family." I closed my eyes, feeling a surge of hatred for Leonard. "He is a jerk, Cole. You know that." "Maybe he is right," Cole whispered. "Maybe we are broken." "We are not broken," I said, biting my tongue to keep from shouting. "We are pregnant. We won. I promise you, Cole. Things are going to change. Just wait until Christmas." "Yeah," he said. "Christmas." He sounded unconvinced, and as the weeks went on, the distance between us grew. I made the mistake of talking about my work. It was all I was doing, so it was all I had to share. I mentioned Owen constantly because I was with him constantly. Owen showed me this incredible cornice detail today, I would say. Or Owen insisted I leave early because I looked pale. I did not hear what Cole was hearing. I heard from a mentor, Cole, alone in our empty house, stewing in his father's criticism and his own insecurity. Heard a replacement. "You spend a lot of time with this Owen guy," Cole said one night, his voice tight. "He is the project lead." "Cole, we are working, right? Working." I'd brushed it off. I thought he was just grumpy. I thought the surprise would fix it. I thought that once I placed that baby in his arms, all the insecurity, all the jealousy, all the feeling of being less than Noah would evaporate. I did not know that while I was buying onesies and dreaming of nurseries, Cole was looking at the credit card alerts on his phone. Riverline Women's Health, Chicago, IIL $250. A Riverline Women's Health, Chicago, IIL $150. Walgreens, Chicago, Roman $2.55. I did not know that he was sitting in his father's study with Leonard pouring him scotch and whispering poison in his ear. I did not know that the silence on the other end of the phone wasn't just sadness. It was suspicion hardening into hatred. I was carrying the answer to all his prayers, and he was convincing himself I was carrying the ultimate betrayal. Every time I said I can't wait to see you, he heard I am coming back to lie to you. Every time I said I have a surprise, he thought she is going to ask for a divorce. So when I drove down that snowy highway toward Maple Ridge, smiling at the thought of the future, I was not driving toward a celebration. I was driving straight into a trap that had been set 6 weeks ago, fueled by silence, insecurity, and a joint credit card statement that told the truth, but told it in a language my husband had forgotten how to read. I did not drive home. Home was the first place they would look. And right now, the house I shared with Cole felt less like a sanctuary and more like a crime scene where the body of our marriage had not yet been found. Instead, I pulled my car into the cracked asphalt lot of the Starlight Motel, a rundown establishment just off the interstate that smelled of diesel fumes and desperation. I walked into the lobby, shaking so hard my teeth chatted, and slapped my personal credit card, not the joint one, on the counter. I asked for room. I used my maiden name, Harper Delaney. It was the first time in 5 years I had introduced myself without the word Rivers attached to it, and the taste of it was bitter like aspirin. Room 112 was clean enough, though the carpet was a shade of brown that did not exist in nature, and the air conditioner rattled like a dying engine. I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring up at the water stains on the nicotine-stained ceiling. For 20 minutes, I just shook. I shook from the adrenaline. I shook from the cold. I shook from the realization that the man I had planned to grow old with had just tried to serve me divorce papers as a spectator sport for his family. Then the shaking stopped. It was replaced by something colder, something harder. I was a structural engineer when a beam failed. I did not cry about the beam. I calculated the load. I assessed the damage. I determined if the integrity of the structure could be salvaged or if it needed to be condemned. I reached for my phone. My fingers hovered over Cole's name, but I scrolled past it. I dialed Jordan Blake instead. Jordan picked up on the second ring. She was an ER nurse who had seen people at their worst, and she had known both Cole and me since our sophomore year of college. Harper. Her voice was sharp, alert. Where are you? I have been staring at my phone waiting for you to call since 10:00 this morning. 10:00? I asked, my voice sounding raspy and foreign to my own ears. Why? Because Cole called me, Jordan said. He was manic. Harper, he was ranting about proof and ultrasounds and asking me if you had ever slipped up and mentioned another guy. He asked if I knew anyone named Owen. I closed my eyes. What did you tell him? I told him to go to hell and that he was delusional, Jordan said flatly. But Harper, it was weird. He did not sound like himself. He sounded weird, rehearsed, like he was reading from a script someone else wrote for him. He mentioned Vince Hollister, I said. Yes, Jordan confirmed. That is exactly who he mentioned. He kept saying Vince says the timeline adds up. Vince says the clinic charges are the smoking gun. Since when does Cole take legal advice from his daddy's attack dog before talking to his wife? Since he decided to blindside me on Christmas Eve, I said, where are you? I am safe. I said, I am in a motel. I cannot go home. Jordan, I cannot see him. Not until I have ammunition. You did not cheat, Harper. I know that. You know that. It does not matter what we know, I said, sitting up straighter. It matters what they can prove or what they think they can prove. They have a narrative. They have dates. They have charges. They are building a case to destroy me. So what are you going to do? I looked at my bag in the corner. Inside was my project notebook filled with sketches of load paths and tension cables for the lakefront Meridian Tower. I am going to do what I do best, I said. I am going to inspect the damage and then I am going to tear their argument down brick by brick. I hung up and pulled the notebook out of my bag. I flipped past the drawings of steel trusses and found a blank page. I took a pen and wrote a new header in bold block letters. Evidence I need before I ever step back in that house. I started writing. My hand moved fast, fueled by a clarity that felt almost dangerous. Item 1. Medical records. I needed the full file from Riverline Women's Health, not just the ultrasound, but the blood work, the hormone levels. Dr. Warren had mentioned that my levels showed signs of prior fertility treatments, the lingering effects of the medication I had taken for 2 years. That was biological proof. This was not a spontaneous fling pregnancy. This was a continuation of a long, hard battle. Item 2. Conception dating. The ultrasound today said 8 weeks. I did the math in the margin of the notebook. 8 weeks ago was late September. I pulled up my calendar on my phone. Late September, the weekend of the 23rd. I had flown home from Chicago that weekend. We had gone to a cabin at Hawking Hills for our anniversary. We had barely left the bed for 48 hours. I circled the date so hard the pen tore through the paper. There is your window. Cole, you were there. Item 3, clinic billing codes. Cole saw Riverline Women's Health and assumed abortion, or STD, checks, or whatever nightmare scenario Leonard had fed him. But insurance codes were specific. Code Z32.01. Encounter for pregnancy test positive. Code 009.9. Supervision of high-risk pregnancy. The code would tell the truth even if he refused to listen to me. Item 4. Witness statements. Owen Brook. They would have to be involved. I hated that. I hated that I was going to have to drag my kind, elderly boss and his yoga teacher wife into the sewage of my marital drama. But I had no choice. I wrote down, get affidavit, get Owen's travel logs, prove he was with Brooke every weekend I was supposedly sleeping with him. Then I paused. I looked at the list. It was solid. It was enough to clear my name in a court of law, but it wasn't enough to explain why this was happening. Jordan's words echoed in my head. He sounded rehearsed. He mentioned Vince. Vince Hollister was Leonard's creature. He was a shark in a three-piece suit who had drafted our prenup 5 years ago. I remembered sitting in his mahogany conference room, feeling small as he slid the document across the table. The infidelity clause. I wrote it down at the bottom of the page, underlining it twice. Tech, who benefits financially if I am found at fault. If we divorced amicably, or if Cole filed without cause, I was entitled to half the equity in our house. I was entitled to a portion of his shares in Rivers Freight and Supply, the family business, because I had invested my own salary into the company during the lean years. But if I cheated, if I was found at fault for infidelity, I got zero. I walked away with my clothes and my car, and Cole's shares, the ones that gave him a voting block against Leonard, would likely revert to family control or be placed in a trust to protect them from me. My God, I whispered to the empty room. This wasn't just about a jealous husband. This was a hostile takeover. I started a second list, emotional evidence. I needed to prove the manipulation. I needed to show the timeline of Cole's mental decline. I logged into our phone carrier's website using the password Cole had never bothered to change. I downloaded the call logs for the last 3 months. I scanned the numbers. There it was, Leonard's landline. Every single day, sometimes twice a day, and then another number, a blocked ID that appeared every Thursday evening for 45 minutes. Teletherapy, I wondered, or a lawyer. I wrote it down. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Riverline Women's Health. It was closed for the holiday, but they had an emergency line for patients. This is the answering service, a woman said. This is Harper Delaney, I said, my voice steady. I am a patient of Dr. Horn. I have an urgent administrative request. I need my entire medical file prepared for pickup on the 26th of December. Every page, every lab result, and I need a signed letter from Dr. Warren confirming the estimated date of conception based on fetal measurements. Ma'am, the office is closed until my husband has accused me of infidelity and is filing for divorce based on a misinterpretation of your billing charges. I interrupted. I need that file to prove this baby is his. Please mark it as urgent. There was a stunned silence on the other end. I will put the message through to Dr. Warren's personal pager immediately. MS. Delaney, thank you. I hung up and took a deep breath. Next came the hardest call. I dialed Owen's cell. It went to voicemail. He was probably drinking eggnog with Brooke, completely unaware that his name was being dragged through the mud in a kitchen in Ohio. Owen, it is Harper, I said to the voicemail. I am so sorry to call you on Christmas Eve. Something catastrophic has happened. Cole has filed for divorce. He has been led to believe that you and I are having an affair, and that my pregnancy is yours. I ended the call and tossed the phone on the bed. I did not cry. I felt like crying, but I refused to waste the hydration. Instead, I opened the banking app on my phone. I navigated to the joint credit card statements. I took screenshots of the last 3 months. I zoomed in on the charges. Rivaline Women's Health. Rivaline Women's Health. Target prenatal vitamins. They looked so innocent on the screen. Just black text on a white background. But Leonard and Cole had turned them into a smoking gun. I opened a photo editing app and selected the red marker tool. I circled each charge. I circled the dates. I circled the locations. I stared at the image until the lines burned into my retinas. You are not secrets anymore, I whispered to the glowing screen. You are evidence now. I laid back on the stiff motel pillows, the notebook on my chest, the phone in my hand. I was alone on Christmas Eve in a $1.59 motel room. My husband hated me. My in-laws were celebrating my destruction, but they had made one critical error. They assumed I would be too heartbroken to fight back. They assumed Harper, the wife, would crumble. They forgot about Harper, the engineer, and I was just beginning to draft the blueprints for their ruin. The fluorescent lights of Rivaline Women's Health hummed with a frequency that usually made me anxious, but today I felt nothing but a cold clinical determination. I sat across from Dr. Laird Warren, watching her face transition from professional politeness to undisguised horror as I explained why I needed my records. He believes, I said, my voice steady, that the conception date does not align with his presence. He believes I was having an affair with my 60-year-old boss in Chicago. Dr. Warren, a woman who had held my hand through 3 failed intrauterine insemination cycles, took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Harper, that is not just insulting. It is medically illiterate. She turned to her computer and began typing furiously. The sound of the keys was the first drumbeat of my counterattack. We are going to build a package, she said, her tone sharp. I am printing the full ultrasound report. Based on the crown rump length of the fetus measure at your appointment, we can narrow the conception window with 95% accuracy. She spun the monitor around. Look at this. The growth markers place conception between September 22nd and September 24th. I stared at the screen. September 23rd was our anniversary. We had been at the cabin in Hawking Hills. We had not left the property for 48 hours. There is something else. Dr. Warren said, her finger tracing a line on a blood work report I had barely glanced at before. I did not mention this earlier because it was not clinically relevant to the baby's health. But in a legal context, it is gold. Your progesterone levels. What about them? They are naturally high, which is great, she explained. But look at the trace markers here. Your blood work shows a specific hormonal pattern that is consistent with the residual effects of the gonadotropins you were taking during your last fertility cycle 4 months ago. It is faint, but it is there. She looked me dead in the eye. Harper, this pregnancy is not an accident. Biologically speaking, your body was primed for this by the treatments you and Cole paid for. This is a continuation of your joint medical history. A fresh fling would not look like this on a blood panel. I felt a lump form in my throat. Can you put that in writing? I will write a letter so detailed that his lawyer will need a medical degree to refute it. She promised I will sign it. I will notarize it. And I will attach a copy of the conception chart that puts you in Ohio, not Chicago, when this baby was made. 2 hours later, I walked out with a thick manila envelope. Step 1 was complete. Step 2 was harder. It required shame. I met Owen and Brooke in the glass-walled conference room at Eveline Urban Studio. The office was empty for the holiday break, the silence amplifying the awkwardness. Owen looked pale, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by shock. Brooke, sitting next to him in a thick wool sweater, looked like she was ready to set something on fire. I laid it all out. The accusation, the timeline, the fact that Cole had named Owen specifically. I expected them to be embarrassed. I expected Owen to worry about HR implications. I expected Brooke to look at me with even a sliver of suspicion. Instead, Brooke slammed her hand down on the table so hard her water bottle jumped. That absolute coward, she hissed. Brooke, Owen said gently. No, Owen, she snapped, turning to me. Harper, do not apologize. This is not your fault. This is a weak man trying to destroy a strong woman because he is insecure. She pulled a notebook out of her bag. I have already started listing dates. Owen is not a spy, Harper. He is a creature of habit. If he is not at work, he is with me. I have my Google Calendar, Owen said, sliding a stack of color-coded printouts across the table. I had my assistant print the last 4 months. Look at the blue blocks. Those are your site meetings. See the attendees list. You and I were never alone. There was always a site foreman, a contractor, or a junior architect present. Every single time, he flipped the page, and here are my travel receipts. Every Friday night, I flew home to the suburbs. Every Monday morning, I flew back. Here are the Yuba receipts from O'Hare Airport to my house. Unless your husband thinks I have the ability to teleport between my living room and your apartment. His theory is physically impossible. Brooke grabbed a pen. I am writing a letter, she announced. I am going to state under penalty of perjury that my husband was present with me during the evenings and weekends in question. I am going to list the movies we watched. I am going to list the dinners we cooked, and I am going to add a paragraph stating that if the Rivers family repeats this lie to one more person, I will personally sue them for defamation of character and contact the board of directors at your husband's company to file a formal harassment grievance. She looked at me, her eyes fierce. You are family to us, Harper. We do not let family get buried. I left the office with a second envelope and a feeling I had not experienced in days. Hope, but hope was not enough. I needed a weapon. Jordan had given me the number of a private investigator named Mason Kerr. We met at a nondescript coffee shop in the Loop. Mason was a guy who blended in average height, brown hair, wearing a gray hoodie that looked expensive but boring. He did not look like a detective. He looked like an IT guy. He listened to my story without blinking, taking notes on a tablet. When I finished, he took a sip of his black coffee and looked at me. I can get you the proof you need to clear your name, Mason said. That is the easy part. The receipts belongs, the witnesses. You are already halfway there, but I have to ask you a question. Mrs. Rivers, it is Delaney. I corrected him. MS. Delaney. MS. Delaney. He nodded. Do you want me to just prove you are innocent, or do you want to know why your husband went nuclear on Christmas Eve? What do you mean? I mean, Mason said, leaning in slightly. Husbands get jealous. Sure, but filing for divorce on a holiday with a process server on standby, getting a high-priced lawyer to draft papers before asking you a single question, that is not just jealousy. That is a strategy. Do you want me to find out who built this strategy? Yes, I said. I want to know everything. Mason went to work. He was expensive, $300 an hour, but within 3 days, his encrypted emails started arriving, and each one was a blow to the chest. The first email contained a credit report and a background check log. Subject inquiry, Origin Harper. Take a look at the attachment. Your credit was pulled on December 10th. That is 2 weeks before Christmas. The inquiry did not come from a lender. It came from a private firm contracted by Rivers, Freight and Supply. Specifically, the request originated from the IP address of Leonard Rivers' home office. The query parameters were flagged for infidelity indicators, hidden assets, and Chicago entanglements. I stared at the screen. Leonard had been hunting for dirt on me before Cole had even seen the clinic charges. He was looking for a reason. He was shopping for a crime to pin on me. The second email came the next day. Subject Cole's Paul Logs. I traced the block number Cole has been calling every Thursday. It is not a woman. It is a telehealth platform called Better Mind. He has been seeing a therapist, Harper, for 3 months. The timing of the calls lines up with his late meetings. My heart broke a little. Cole was suffering. He was talking to a stranger about his feelings because he felt he couldn't talk to me. He was trying to get help. But then I realized the tragedy of it. He was seeking clarity. But at home, Leonard was filling his head with static. But it was the third email that turned my sadness into cold, hard rage. It arrived on the morning of the 29th. The subject line was just audio file. The smoking gun. I opened it. There was a brief message from Mason. I have a contact who bartends at the Rusty Anchor in Maple Ridge. He knows Leonard. He knows Vince Hollister. He saw them in a booth 3 nights before Christmas and turned on his voice memo app when he heard your name. The audio is a bit muddy, but listen to the 10-second mark. I put in my earbuds and pressed play. The background noise of clinking glasses and low chatter filled my ears. Then Leonard's voice cut through, distinctive and booming. She is smart, Vince. That is the problem. If they just split up, she takes half the equity in the farmhouse and she keeps her stake in the business. She bought those shares with her own money. Not if we trigger the prenup. Vince's voice replied, smooth and oily. The infidelity clause is a total forfeit of assets, but we need proof, real proof. We have the clinic charges. Leonard said Cole is already spiraling. I showed him the bill. I told him, why would she go to a clinic in Chicago if it was your baby? He is ready to snap. Once we prove she cheated, or at least make it look convincing enough that she settles to avoid a scandal, she walks away with nothing. Cole gets the house. We keep the warehouse and the river's name stays clean. And Cole, Vince asked, he is going to be a wreck. He will get over it, Leonard said dismissively. He needs to toughen up anyway. Getting rid of her is the best thing for him. She makes him feel small. I need him focused on the business, not chasing after her approval. I pulled the earbuds out, my hands trembling. It wasn't about the baby. It wasn't even really about the affair. It was a heist. Leonard Rivers was willing to gaslight his own son, destroy his grandchild's family, and frame me for adultery, all to save a percentage of equity in a warehouse distribution company. He saw Cole's insecurity not as a problem to be solved, but as a lever to be pulled. I saved the file to 3 different hard drives. I emailed it to my own secure cloud. Mason had asked if I wanted to clear my name or find the truth. I had found both. And as I looked at the file named Rivers Conspiracy Evidence MP3, I knew that when I walked back into that farmhouse, I wasn't just going to be defending myself. I was going to be the prosecutor. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of the Skyline Tower took exactly 45 seconds. Time enough for my ears to pop and my stomach to twist into a tighter knot. I was here to see Avery Quinn. If Vince Hollister was a shark, Avery Quinn was the killer whale that ate sharks for sport. She did not advertise on billboards. She did not have a catchy slogan. She was the attorney you called when you wanted to burn the earth so thoroughly that nothing would ever grow on it again. Her office was a glass box suspended over the city, smelling of espresso and expensive leather. Avery herself was petite, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, with eyes that scanned documents like a laser scanner reading a barcode. She did not offer me coffee. She did not offer me a tissue. She pointed to the chair opposite her desk and held out her hand for my file. I handed over the packet I had compiled, the medical records, the calendar logs, the notes from Mason, and most importantly, the prenuptial agreement I had signed 5 years ago. Avery opened the file. The room was silent for 10 minutes, save for the sound of pages turning and the occasional scratch of her fountain pen aggressively circling a paragraph. Finally, she looked up. This prenuptial agreement is a weapon, she said. Her voice was low, devoid of sympathy, which I appreciated. I had enough sympathy. I needed a strategy. Who drafted this? Vince Hollister, I said. My father-in-law's attorney. Of course he did. Avery muttered. She spun the document around and tapped a section on page 12 with a manicured nail. Section 4, paragraph B. The infidelity fault clause. Did you read this before you signed it? I skimmed it. I admitted, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. I was 27. I was in love. I trusted them. Leonard told me it was standard boilerplate to protect the family assets. It is not standard. Avery corrected me. It is predatory. Listen to this language. In the event that the dissolution of marriage is precipitated by a proven act of adultery by the non-moneyed spouse, said spouse shall forfeit all claims to alimony, all claims to equitable distribution of the marital residence. And here is the kicker. Any equity shares held in Rivers Freight and Supply shall revert to the primary shareholder at the original purchase price. She looked at me over her glasses. You own shares in the company, Harper? Yes, I said, 10%. I bought them with my own salary 3 years ago when the company needed liquidity for a fleet expansion. I put $50,000 of my own money into that business and the company has grown since then. It has tripled in value, I said. Exactly, Avery said. leaning back. If you divorce Cole amicably, you keep those shares. They are worth, by my estimation, $150,000 today, plus the future dividends. But if you cheated, if you are the villain, I lose the shares. I realized the cold logic settling over me, and Leonard buys them back for the original $50,000. He makes $100,000 profit just by ruining my reputation. He reclaims the voting bloc. Avery said, that is what this is about. It is not just about saving Cole from heartbreak. It is about consolidating power. Leonard Rivers is trying to steal your equity under the guise of a moral crusade. I felt sick. I had thought Leonard was just a controlling patriarch. I did not realize he was a corporate raider who viewed his son's marriage as a hostile takeover target. So what do we do? I asked. Do I file a response? Do I go to mediation? Avery laughed, a short, sharp sound. Mediation is for people who want to find a middle ground. These people tried to ambush you on Christmas Eve with a process server. They do not want a middle ground. They want your head on a spike. If we go to court, it will drag on for 18 months. Leonard has deep pockets. He will bleed you dry in legal fees before you ever get to a judge. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the gray city. We are not going to play defense, Harper. We are going to play offense. If Cole's accusations are false, and looking at this medical evidence, they are demonstrably false, then what he did is not just grounds for divorce. It is defamation per se. Defamation. In this state, falsely accusing a woman of unchastity is one of the few categories of speech that is considered defamation per se, Avery explained. Turning back to me, it means you do not even have to prove financial damages. The damage is assumed. And because he did it in front of third parties, his parents, and because he filed a legal document based on that lie, we have a case. But we can go further. She started pacing. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, civil conspiracy. If Leonard knew the accusations were false, and that recording from the bar suggests he did, then he is not just a bystander. He is a co-conspirator. We can sue him personally. My instinct, the soft part of me, that still remembered dancing with Cole at our wedding, flinched. I do not want to destroy them, Avery. I just want to save my marriage. Or at least I want to save the truth. Avery stopped pacing. She walked over to me and placed her hands on the desk, leaning down until she was eye level with me. Harper, she said softly, wake up. Your husband filed for divorce on the morning of Christ's birth. He told his family, you were carrying a bastard. He is trying to steal your financial future. Are you trying to save your marriage, or are you trying to make sure you are not erased from your own life? I stared at her. The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. If you walk into a mediation room, they will bury you in paperwork. Avery continued. They will count on you being too polite to fight back. They are banking on your silence. So, we are going to do something they do not expect. We are not going to file motion. We are going to file reality check. She returned to her chair and pulled out a fresh legal pad. Here is the strategy, she said. You are not going to the court. You are going to the next family gathering. I want you to walk into the lion's den. You want me to go back to the house. I want you to go back to the scene of the crime, Avery said. But this time, you are not coming with gifts. You are coming with witnesses. You are coming with the medical records. And you are coming with this. She tapped a folder on her desk. I am going to draft a civil complaint. It will name Cole Rivers, Leonard Rivers, and Vince Hollister as defendants in a lawsuit for defamation, conspiracy, and fraud. We will not file it yet. We will put it in a sealed envelope. You will place it on the coffee table and tell them that they have two choices. They can recant everything, restore your reputation, and give you fair terms. Or you can open that envelope, file the lawsuit, and drag the Rivers family name through the press for the next 2 years. Blackmail, I asked. Leverage. She corrected. It is only blackmail if the information is false. This is the truth, and the truth is the one thing Leonard Rivers cannot afford. Avery then pulled up a property record on her computer screen. There is one more thing you need to know. Something that explains why Cole is so terrified of his father. She turned the screen toward me. It was the deed to the farmhouse, the home Cole and I had lived in for 5 years. The home I thought we owned. Look at the date on the deed transfer. Avery said 5 years ago, 2 weeks after you signed the prenup. I squinted at the document. It lists Cole as the owner. Look closer. She said it lists Cole Rivers and Leonard Rivers as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. Cole does not own that house. Harper. He co-owns it with his father. If Cole defies Leonard, Leonard can force a partition sale. He can kick Cole out of his own home. Leonard made sure that Cole's housing security was tied to his loyalty. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was a masterclass in control. Leonard had structured Cole's entire life so that rebellion was impossible. If Cole stood up to him, he lost his job. He lost his house. And now Leonard was trying to make sure that if Cole stayed with me, he lost his pride. He is trapped, I whispered. He is, Avery agreed. But that does not give him the right to destroy you to save himself. When you walk into that house with the truth, Harper, you are not just challenging your husband's story. You are threatening a system Leonard has been building for 30 years. He will not go down quietly. I do not expect him to, I said. Good. Avery stood up and extended her hand. I will have the draft complaint ready by Friday. You gave your team together. Jordan, the investigator, the boss, and his wife. You go in there with a phalanx. Do not let them isolate you again. I shook her hand. Her grip was iron. One last piece of advice, Avery said as I walked to the door. When you look at Cole, do not look for the man you married. Look at the opposing party, because until he signs that retraction, that is all he is. I walked out of the office carrying 2 heavy folders. The first one was labeled Proof of Truth. It contained the ultrasound, the letter from Dr. Warren, the affidavit from Brooke, and the flight logs from Owen. It was the shield. The second folder, the one Avery had just handed me, was labeled simply Nuclear Auctions. It contained the draft lawsuit that detailed Leonard's conspiracy, the transcript of the bar recording, and the threat to expose their financial maneuvers to the shareholders of Rivers Freight and Supply. It was the sword. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the car began its smooth, rapid descent, I watched the numbers count down. 40, 39, 38. A week ago, I had been crying in a motel room, shaking at the thought of losing my family. I had been a structural engineer analyzing the collapse of my own life, looking for a way to patch the cracks. But as the elevator hit the 20th floor, I felt something inside me shift. The grief, which had been a heavy, suffocating blanket, began to compress. It hardened. It crystallized into something sharp and cold. I was done crying. I was done wondering what I had done wrong. They had tried to erase me. They had tried to edit me out of the family narrative like a mistake. They thought they could crush me with a prenup and a lie because they assumed I would play by the rules of a heartbroken wife. The elevator doors chimed softly as they opened onto the marble lobby. I stepped out, my heels clicking rhythmically on the stone floor. I clutched the folders to my chest, not like a shield, but like a weapon. I am not going to save the marriage. I thought, walking out into the winter sunlight, I am going to save myself. And if the Rivers dynasty had to burn to the ground to keep me warm, then I would be the one to strike the match. The knowledge that Cole was in therapy sat in my stomach like a stone I had swallowed but could not digest. When Mason told me about the blocked number, the weekly 45-minute calls to a crisis counselor, the anger that had been fueling me for days flickered. It did not go out, but it changed color. It shifted from the bright hot red of righteous indignation to a bruised, aching purple. If Cole was just a villain, a jealous monster acting out of spite, I could destroy him without blinking. But a villain who was secretly paying a stranger to help him stop crying, that was harder to hate. It complicated the geometry of my rage. I needed to see him, not in the flesh. I was not ready for that, but I needed to see the space he was inhabiting. I needed to understand how we had gone from a team to adversaries in the span of 6 weeks. I waited until 2:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday when I knew Cole would be at the distribution center and Leonard would be holding court at the main office. I drove to the small starter house on the edge of town. We still co-owned it, though we had been staying at the farmhouse more often to help his parents. This little bungalow, with its peeling blue paint and the porch swing we had installed on our first anniversary, was supposed to be our escape pod. Now it felt like a tomb. I keyed into the front door. The air inside was stale, suspending dust motes in the shafts of winter sunlight that cut through the blinds. It was quiet, not the peaceful quiet of a resting home, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a place where people had stopped speaking the truth to each other. I walked through the living room, stepping over a pile of unopened mail on the rug. I saw my own handwriting on a sticky note on the fridge. Buy more coffee. It felt like an artifact from a lost civilization. I went into the bedroom. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled in a way that suggested restless, thrashing sleep. On Cole's nightstand next to a bottle of melatonin and a half-empty glass of water lay his journal. It was a bound leather notebook I had bought him 3 years ago. He used to write lists or project ideas in it. I knew it was private. In any other lifetime, I would never have touched it. But the man who owned this journal had just tried to serve me with divorce papers in front of his mother. So the Geneva Convention of Marriage no longer applied. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the cover. The early entries were mundane work stress, notes on lumber prices, reminders to call his mom. But as I flipped toward the autumn months, the handwriting changed. It became jagged, pressed hard into the paper, the loops of the letters sharp and angry. I stopped at an entry dated in mid-September. September 14th, he wrote, Sunday. We went to Noah and Emmer's for the barbecue. I knew it was coming. I could feel it as soon as Emma refused the wine. Pregnant? Of course they are. Noah has been married for 5 minutes, and he hits the bullseye. I smiled. I hugged him. I think I pulled a muscle in my face trying to look happy. Dad cornered me by the grill later. He asked if Harper and I were ever going to get serious about the family line. $250 Chicago. She is not sick. She would have told me if she was sick. She tells me everything, or she used to. If she was pregnant with my child, she would be screaming it from the rooftops. We have been trying for 2 years. She knows how much I want this. So if she is going to a clinic and not telling me, there is only one reason. It is not mine. I looked up the clinic. They do everything. Prenatal STI testing, termination. My head is spinning. I picture her in that city with those architects feeling important, feeling seen. I look at myself in the mirror, and I see a guy who manages a warehouse in Ohio. Why would she stay? I knew she would wake up one day and realize I am not enough. I just didn't think it would happen this fast. I covered my mouth with my hand. The tragic irony was suffocating. I had hidden the appointments to protect the surprise, to make the moment perfect. He had taken that silence and filled it with his deepest insecurities. He had written a story where he was the victim because he could not imagine a world where he was the father. I turned the page to November. The entries were becoming erratic, written at odd hours, 3:00 in the morning, midnight, November 12th. He wrote, spoke to the counselor on the app again. Dr. S says I am projecting. He says I need to talk to Harper. I can't. If I ask her and she lies, I will die. If I ask her and she tells the truth, I will die. It is easier to be angry than to be this scared. I keep having this nightmare where she leaves me for someone more successful, more stable, more like what Dad wanted for her. Leonard always told me I was lucky to land her. He said she is out of your league, son. Better keep her on a short leash or she will bolt. I think she bolted. I think she is gone, and her body just hasn't left the house yet. My heart itched for him, for the scared little boy living inside my husband's 6-foot frame, terrified that he was unlovable. But then I turned to the final marked page, dated 2 weeks before Christmas, and the ache hardened back into ice. December 10th, Dad called me into his office. He closed the blinds. He looked serious. He said, I did some digging, Cole, because I love you and because you are too soft to look for the truth yourself. He slid a folder across the desk. Screenshots, her credit card statement, the clinic charges circled in red marker. He had a report from a private investigator about Owen Mallister. No proof of them together. But Dad said, you do not need a smoking gun when you have smoked this thick. He told me about the prenup, the clause. He said, if you wait, she leaves you and takes half the business. She takes the house. She laughs at you with her new man. If you strike first, you keep your dignity. You keep the assets. You need to protect yourself, Cole, before she ruins you. Be a man for once. I nearly threw up, but he is right. She is playing me. I have to stop being a fool. I stared at the words. Be a man for once. Leonard hadn't just uncovered the evidence. He had curated it. He had taken a frightened, depressed man and manipulated his worst fears to engineer a financial coup. He knew Cole was unstable. He knew Cole was seeing a therapist. And instead of suggesting marriage counseling, Leonard had handed him a loaded gun and pointed it at my head. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. I was not shaking. I was working. I took a high-resolution photo of the September entry. Click. I took a photo of the October spiraling. Click. I took a photo of the December entry where Leonard explicitly instructed him to use the prenup to protect the assets. Click. These were not just diary entries anymore. They were proof of undue influence. They were proof that my husband was not acting of his own free will, but was a puppet dancing on strings held by a bitter old man who loved his money more than his son. I closed the journal and placed it back on the nightstand, exactly as I had found it. I stood up and walked to the closet. I grabbed a few sweaters, a pair of jeans, and my winter scarf, shoving them into a tote bag. It was a perfunctory gesture. I hadn't really come for the clothes. As I walked back through the silent house, the ghost of the man I married seemed to watch me from the corners. I felt a wave of grief so profound it almost knocked me over. I realized I was mourning two men. I was mourning the husband who had been too weak to trust me, who had let his insecurity rot our foundation until it collapsed. And I was mourning the man he could have been if he hadn't been raised by a father who viewed love as a weakness and control as the only currency that mattered. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me. The click of the deadbolt sounded final. I walked to my car, clutching my phone in my pocket. I had come looking for clothes, but I was leaving with something far more dangerous. I was holding the anatomy of the betrayal. I had the medical evidence to destroy their lie. Now I had the psychological evidence to destroy their justification. I sat in the driver's seat and looked back at the house one last time. You poor broken things, I whispered, thinking of Cole and Leonard. One man weaponized fear to control his kingdom. The other man weaponized fear to blow up his own sanctuary. And in the middle of their wreckage, they had made the fatal mistake of thinking I would burn with them. I put the car in gear. I was done visiting the museum of my past. It was time to drive toward the future. I had a lawsuit in the passenger seat that was going to clear the road. The silence had lasted exactly 21 days. For 3 weeks, I had not spoken a word to my husband. I had not answered the barrage of texts from my mother-in-law, Diane, which ranged from hysterical apologies to passive-aggressive reminders that marriage requires forgiveness. I had let the silence stretch until it became a physical thing. A taut wire pulled across the distance between Chicago and Maple Ridge, but silence eventually has to break. I just wanted to make sure that when it did, I controlled the noise. I called Diane on a Tuesday morning. I knew Leonard would be at the warehouse and Cole would be at the site, leaving her alone in that big cinnamon-scented house to stew in her own guilt. Harper. Her voice was breathless when she picked up, as if she had been staring at the phone, willing it to ring. Oh, thank God. Harper, honey, where are you? We have been so worried. I am safe, Diane, I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice I used when I was explaining to a contractor that a load-bearing wall was failing clinical, detached factual. I am calling because I think it is time we talked. Yes, she breathed. Yes, of course. We want that too. Cole is a mess, Harper. He won't eat. He just wants to fix this. I am sure he does, I said, staring at the stack of manila folders on the desk of my temporary apartment. I want to call a family meeting this Saturday, 200 at the farmhouse. Of course, Diane said, and I could hear the relief washing over her. She thought I was going to surrender. She thought I was coming to beg for my place back at the table. I will make a roast. I will tell everyone. Everyone, I repeated. I want Leonard there. I want Cole. I want Noah and Emmer. And I want Vince Hollister. Diane paused. Vince, the attorney. Since he seems to have so many opinions about my marriage, I think he should be there to hear what I have to say. I said, you all heard one version of what is happening on Christmas Eve. It is time you heard mine. Okay, Diane said, her voice gaining a nervous edge. Okay, I will arrange it. We just want you home, Harper. I will see you Saturday, I said, and hung up before she could say she loved me. I did not want to hear it. Love does not watch silently while your life is dismantled. Saturday morning dawned gray and flat. The sky over the Midwest was a sheet of unpolished steel, threatening snow, but never quite delivering it. I packed my car with the precision of a soldier preparing for a deployment. On the passenger seat, I placed the 2 folders Avery Quinn had prepared. The first, labeled Proof of Truth, was thick with medical records, affidavit, and travel logs. The second, labeled Nuclear Options, was thinner but infinitely heavier. Next to the folders, I placed a small navy blue velvet box. It was the same box I had carried in my pocket on Christmas Eve. Inside were the 3 pregnancy tests. The ink on the little windows, now dry and faded, but still undeniably pink. It was supposed to be the happiest gift of Cole's life. Now it was evidence I did not drive alone, though I would walk through the door alone. 3 cars followed me out of the city limits. In the first car was Avery Quinn, dressed in a suit sharp enough to cut glass, looking like a predator anticipating a meal. In the second car was Mason Kerr, my private investigator, with his laptop and his recordings. In the third car was Jordan, my best friend, who had traded her hospital scrubs for a black blazer and a look of pure vengeance. We had a plan. They would park down the street just out of sight of the farmhouse windows. I would go in alone. I would present my case if the Rivers family accepted the truth and agreed to my terms. I would walk out if they fought. If Leonard tried to bully me, or if Vince tried to twist the law, I would send a single text message, green light. At that signal, Avery and Mason would walk through the front door and turn a family dispute into a legal raid. And digitally, I had my air support. Owen and Brooke were on standby, sitting in their living room in Chicago with a laptop open, ready to accept a video call and testify to my whereabouts with the righteous fury of people whose own honor had been impugned. The drive to Maple Ridge took 5 hours. I spent the first 2 hours in silence, listening to the hum of the tires on the asphalt. I spent the next 2 hours rehearsing my opening lines out loud over and over again, trying to scrub the tremor from my voice. I am not here to argue, I said to the empty car. I am here to correct the record. No, that sounded too robotic. You called my child a mistake. I tried again, my voice catching on the word child. You tried to steal my future. Better, harder. 10 am outside of town. I pulled into a gas station. My hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from a surplus of adrenaline that had nowhere to go. I needed to ground myself. I needed to remember why I was doing this. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. I flipped it to selfie mode and pressed record. I looked at myself on the screen. I looked tired. My skin was pale and there were shadows under my eyes that makeup could not quite hide, but my eyes were clear. Harper, I said to the camera, if you get in there and you start to feel soft, if you look at Cole and remember how he used to look at you, stop. If you start to think maybe you should just let it go to keep the peace, remember, I took a breath, watching the condensation cloud the air in the cold car. Remember how it felt to stand in that hallway. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Remember to flatten yourself against the wall. Remember hearing the man who vowed to protect you tell his parents that your baby, our baby, was a mistake. Remember the sound of his disgust. He did not give you the benefit of the doubt. He gave you a process server. Do not back down. I ended the recording. I saved it. I tucked the phone into the deep pocket of my wool coat, right next to my heart. I pulled back onto the road. The familiar landmarks of Maple Ridge began to appear. The old grain silo, the high school football field, the turnoff for the eccentric antique shop Diane loved. It was a landscape of memory, but it felt foreign now, like a movie set I had once visited but no longer belonged to. I turned onto the long winding driveway of the Rivers estate. The snow from Christmas had mostly melted, leaving behind slush and brown mud that splattered against the wheel wells. When the farmhouse came into view, my stomach gave a hard, violent twist. The driveway was full. Leonard's massive pickup truck was parked near the garage, taking up 2 spaces as usual. Cole's sedan was next to it. Noah and Emmer's SUV was parked behind them, the baby on board sticker in the window mocking me with its cheerfulness. And there was a black luxury sedan I recognized as Vince Hollister's. They were all there, the whole jury. I'd parked my car at the bottom of the drive, ensuring I wasn't blocked in. I checked the rear view mirror. The street was empty. My team was in position, waiting for the signal. I turned off the ignition. The silence rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. I reached over to the passenger seat. I picked up the folder labeled Proof of Truth. I picked up the folder labeled Nuclear Options. And then I picked up the navy velvet box. I stepped out of the car. The air smelled of wet earth and wood smoke, the same scent that had greeted me on Christmas Eve. It was a sensory trigger that almost made my knees buckle. For a split second I was back there holding gifts, thinking I was walking into a celebration. No, I told myself, standing up straighter. That woman is gone. She died in the hallway. I walked up the path to the front porch. I could hear sounds coming from inside, the muffled hum of voices, the rise and fall of a commentator on television, a football game. It was eerily, terrifyingly similar to that night. They were inside drinking beer, watching the game, talking about me. Maybe Leonard was making another joke about his legacy. Maybe Cole was sitting there in silence, letting his father rewrite his reality. I stepped onto the porch. My boots made a hollow sound on the wooden planks. I stood before the heavy oak door. I raised my hand to knock, but then I stopped. My hand hovered over the brass knob. This was it. The moment of no return. Once I turned this knob, I wasn't just walking into a house. I was walking into a war. I was about to shatter the illusion of the perfect Rivers family. I was about to break my husband's heart with the truth, and then break his father's power with the law. I closed my eyes for 1 second. I pictured the ultrasound image tucked inside the folder, a tiny grayscale beam. My witness for you, I thought. I did not knock. I reached out and grasped the cold metal of the door knob. But before I could turn it, the door was yanked open from the inside. Diane stood there. She was wearing an apron, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her eyes went wide when she saw me. She looked older than she had 3 weeks ago. Her face was drawn, her smile lines deepening into grooves of anxiety. "Harper," she breathed, "you are here." Behind her, the warmth of the house spilled out, carrying the sound of the television. And then, cutting through the noise, came Leonard's voice from the living room. "Good," he boomed, sounding impatient or authoritative, and completely unaware that he was about to lose everything. "Let us finally get this over with." I looked at Diane. I did not smile. I gripped my folders tighter, stepped past her over the threshold, and walked into the lion's den. The living room of the Rivers farmhouse was exactly as I remembered it from Christmas Eve, down to the way the furniture was arranged to face the television like an altar. But today the television was muted. The football game flickered silently on the screen, a ghost of normalcy in a room that was about to become a crime scene. Leonard sat in his oversized leather recliner, a beer in his hand, looking like a king holding court. Vince Hollister sat on the adjacent sofa, his briefcase resting by his feet like a loyal dog. Noel and Emmer were huddled together on the love seat, looking anxious, while Cole stood by the fireplace, his arm resting on the mantelpiece, staring into the dead ash. When I walked in, the air left the room. I did not say hello. I did not take off my coat. I walked straight to the center of the Persian rug, the exact spot where Cole had intended for the process server to hand me the papers 3 weeks ago. I planted my feet. I made eye contact with each of them, letting the silence stretch until Vince shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "You are probably wondering why I called you here," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried to the corners of the room. "We assumed you finally came to your senses," Leonard said, taking a sip of his beer. "Have you brought a counter-offer? Because Vince has the original filing ready to go." I brought a counter-narrative. I corrected him. I placed the 2 manila folders on the heavy oak coffee table. Then I placed the small navy blue velvet gift box right on top of them. Cole's eyes flicked to the box. I saw a flicker of recognition. It was the box he thought contained a watch or cufflinks. On Christmas Eve, I said, keeping my eyes locked on Cole. I arrived here 40 minutes early. The front door was unlocked. I walked in. I stood in the hallway right outside that archway. I pointed to the spot. Cole went pale. I heard you tell your parents that I was pregnant. I continued. I heard you call it a mistake. I heard you say it wasn't yours. And I heard you, Leonard, tell him to serve me with papers in front of everyone so I couldn't spin the story. You were eavesdropping. Leonard scoffed, leaning forward. That isn't exactly noble. Harper, lurking in hallways. No one forced you to talk about me like I was a defendant you were trying to convict. I shot back, my voice cutting through his bluster like a knife. You thought you were writing the ending to my marriage. You were wrong. I reached down and flipped open the lid of the navy box. There were no diamonds inside. There were 3 white plastic sticks, the windows displaying the faint dried pink lines of positive results. This was your Christmas present. Cole, I said. I didn't tell you over the phone because I wanted to see your face when I told you we had finally beaten the odds. I wanted to give you a miracle. You gave me a process server. Cole stared at the tests. His hand twitched at his side. It is a nice prop. Leonard sneered. But biology doesn't lie. Harper, you were in Chicago. Cole was here. Unless you have figured out an immaculate conception. That baby belongs to your boss. I'm glad you brought up biology. I said. I opened the folder labeled Proof of Truth. I pulled out the letter from Dr. Layer Warren printed on heavy medical letterhead and the glossy black and white ultrasound image. This is a signed affidavit from my obstetrician, I said, sliding it across the table toward Cole. It details the crown rump length of the fetus and the gestational age based on the measurements taken 3 weeks ago. The date of conception is narrowed down to a 72-hour window. Cole picked up the paper. His hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. Read the dates, Cole, I commanded. September 22nd through September 24th, he whispered. Where were we on September 23rd? I asked. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and glassy. The cabin, Hawking Hills, for our anniversary. Exactly, I said. We didn't leave that cabin for 2 days. We were together intimately, exclusively. I looked around the room. This baby is 9,000% yours. Cole, it is the child you prayed for. It is the child you cried over when the treatments failed. And you just spent the last month telling your lawyer it was a bastard. I heard a small strangled sound from the love seat. I looked over to see Emma pressing her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Noah looked sick. They had envied us this miracle, and now they were watching us destroy it. That is just an estimate, Leonard sputtered, though his face had lost some of its ruddy color. Doctors make mistakes. You were in Chicago for weeks. You were spending late nights with Mallister. We have the credit card statements. We have the charges. Yes, the smoking gun, I said. I pulled out the next sheet from the folder. It was a spreadsheet I had compiled, cross-referencing every single charge Leonard had flagged with my work calendar and Owen's calendar. Here is the charge to Riverline Women's Health, I said, pointing to the red circle code Z32.01, pregnancy confirmation. I used our joint card, the one that sends a text alert to your phone every time I swipe it. If I were sneaking around to hide a shameful secret, do you really think I would have put it on a shared ledger? I tossed the paper down. And here is the timeline of my late nights with Owen. I pulled out my phone. But why don't we let Owen tell you himself? What are you doing? Vince asked, sitting up straighter. I am calling a witness, I said. I tapped the screen and hit the speaker button. The video call connected instantly. Owen and Brooke's faces filled the screen. They were sitting in their kitchen in Chicago. Owen looked serious. Brooke looked like she was ready to reach through the phone and strangle someone. You are the speaker, I said. My husband and his family are listening. Hello, Cole, Owen said. His voice was calm, disappointed. The voice of a teacher addressing a student who had cheated on a test. I am looking at the allegations Harper sent over. I have my travel logs here. For every date you claim, I was with your wife in the evenings. I have a flight receipt showing I was in the air, or a NUA receipt showing I was at my home in the suburbs. And let me be clear, Brooke cut in, her voice sharp and crystal clear in the silent living room. My husband has never been unfaithful in 30 years of marriage. The fact that you dragged his name into your messy little drama is not just insulting. It is actionable. Vince Hollister flinched. He knew exactly what that word meant. If I hear one more whisper that Owen is the father of Harper's baby, Brooke continued, we will be filing a defamation suit against every single person in that room. We have the resources to drag this out for years. Do not test me. Thank you, Brooke, I said. I ended the call. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. The lie, the foundational lie that Leonard had built this entire divorce strategy on, was gone. It had been smashed into dust by dates, medical codes, and the angry voice of a yoga teacher from Chicago. Cole was staring at the ultrasound picture in his hand. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a coma to find he had burned down his own house. He looked at the image of his child, and then he looked at me. His eyes were filled with a terrifying mixture of joy and horror. He was seeing his baby, but he was also seeing what he had done to the mother. It is mine, Cole whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a realization that hit him like a physical blow. Yes, I said, my voice cold. It is, and you were going to let a process server hand me a paper that called it a mistake. I didn't know, Cole stammered, looking toward his father. Dad said the proof looked so real. The proof was real, I said. The interpretation was a lie. A lie you were too weak to question, because it was easier to believe I was a villain than to believe you were worthy of being a father. Leonard stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floorboards. Okay, Leonard said, waving his hand dismissively, though his eyes were darting around the room like a trapped animal. So, the baby is yours. Fine, that is good news, isn't it? We can drop the infidelity clause. We can tear up the filing. Cole, you are going to be a dad. Congratulations. He tried to smile. It was a grotesque stretching of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. You think that is it? I asked, stepping closer to the table. You think you can just say oops and everything goes back to normal? You think you can accuse me of adultery, try to strip me of my assets, and humiliate me, and then just pivot to planning a baby shower? We are family, Harper, Diane said, her voice trembling from the kitchen doorway where she had been hovering. Families forgive. We made a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk, I said. This wasn't a mistake. This was a strategy. I reached for the second folder, the one labeled Nuclear Auctions. I have cleared my name. I said to the room, the lie about the affair is dead. Now, we are going to talk about the truth. We are going to talk about why this really happened. And I promise you, Leonard, by the time I am done with this folder, you are going to wish the only thing you had to worry about was an affair. Everyone stared at the second folder. The atmosphere in the room shifted from embarrassment to dread. They realized that the defense was over. The prosecution was about to begin. I placed my hand on the second folder. The room was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence now. Before it had been the silence of judgment. Now it was the silence of fear. They knew I had the truth on my side, but they did not yet know how deep the rock went. Clearing my name was the easy part, I said, looking at Cole. He was still holding the ultrasound photo, his thumb brushing the glossy paper as if trying to apologize to the image. The hard part is explaining how we got here. How a man who loved me for 5 years could be convinced in less than a month that I was a monster. I opened the folder. It was labeled Pressure and Motive. Cole didn't just wake up one day and decide I was cheating. I said he was led there step by his own insecurity. Yes, but mostly by a voice he has been listening to his entire life. I pulled out the photos I had taken of Cole's journal. I did not hand them around. I held them up, reading selected passages aloud. I kept the most intimate details private. I was not cruel, and I read the parts that mattered. September 14th, I read. Dad cornered me by the grill. He asked if Harper and I were ever going to get serious about the family line. He said, at least one of my boys can perform where it counts. Better check your plumbing. Cole. I lowered the paper and looked at Noah. My brother-in-law's face crumbled. He looked at his father, then at Cole. Dad said that. Noah whispered at my barbecue. Leonard shifted in his chair. It was a joke. No locker room talk. You boys are too sensitive. It wasn't a joke to Cole, I said. He wrote here. I felt like I was 12 years old again. The defective son. I wanted to scream at Harper for not being pregnant. Diane let out a small strangled sob and covered her mouth with her hand. She was starting to see the picture. She was starting to see that the monster in this story wasn't the wife working in Chicago. It was the father sitting in the recliner. I read the next entry. October 20th. If she were pregnant with my child, she would tell me. If she isn't telling me, that means it isn't mine. I knew she would wake up one day and realize I am not enough. I looked at Cole. You were drowning, I said softly. You were convinced I was going to leave you because you have been told your whole life that you aren't good enough to keep anything valuable. And instead of throwing you a lifeline, your father handed you an anchor. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message. Green light. 30 seconds later, the front door opened. Mason Kerr walked in. He didn't look like a detective. He looked like a guy who fixed computers, which made him all the more terrifying when he started speaking. Who the hell is this? Leonard barked, standing up. My name is Mason Kerr, Mason said calmly. Walking to the center of the room, he placed a tablet on the coffee table. I am a private investigator hired by MS Delaney, but I think we have met indirectly. Mr. Rivers, you hired my competitor, Beacon Investigations, on December 10th. Leonard's face went from red to a sickly gray. I found the invoice, Mason said, tapping the tablet. You ordered a background check on Harper 2 weeks before Christmas. You requested a specific focus on infidelity indicators and hidden assets. You were looking for dirt before Cole even saw the clinic charges. I was protecting my son, Leonard shouted. A father has a right to look out for his boy. And then there is this, Mason said. He pressed play on the tablet. The audio was muddy, the background noise of a bar clinking and buzzing, but Leonard's voice cut through it like a foghorn. Once we prove she cheated, she walks away with nothing. Cole gets the house. We keep the warehouse and our name stays clean. The recording ended. The silence in the room was deafening. Vince Hollister closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. He knew he was compromised. He knew this was bad. But I wasn't done. Avery Quinn walked in next. The click of her heels on the hardwood floor sounded like gunshots. She didn't say a word. She just walked over to Leonard and dropped a copy of the prenuptial agreement on his lap. Page 12, Avery said, her voice ice-cold, highlighted in neon yellow. The infidelity clause. She turned to the room. If Harper is found at fault for adultery, she forfeits her share of the marital home. She forfeits alimony, but most importantly, her 10% stake in Rivers Freight and Supply reverts to the primary shareholder, Leonard Rivers, at the original purchase price. Avery looked at Noah. Your father has been trying to consolidate the voting shares for months, hasn't he? Harper's 10% is the swing vote. If she keeps it in a divorce, she could sell it to a competitor or she could vote against him. But if she cheated, Leonard gets it back for pennies on the dollar. Noah turned to his father. His face was pale, drained of blood. Dad, he whispered, tell me you didn't. It is business, Noah. Leonard snapped, but his voice cracked. She is a liability. She was always going to leave him. I just wanted to make sure when she did, she didn't take a piece of my company with her. So, you manufactured a scandal, I said. I pulled out the final piece of evidence. It was a screenshot of an email. 2 days before Cole called Vince, I said, holding it up. He received an anonymous email. It claimed a concerned coworker saw me leaving a hotel bar with Owen Mallister. It described us holding hands. It was the final push Cole needed to believe the lie. I looked at Cole. You believed it, didn't you? Cole nodded, tears streaming down his face. It knows the details. It knew the name of the hotel. Mason traced the IP address. I said, Mason nodding. It didn't come from a coworker. It didn't come from Chicago. It came from a laptop registered to the home Wi-Fi network at 14 Maple Drive. I looked at Diane. That is this house, isn't it? Diane let out a wail. She stared at her husband as if he were a stranger. You wrote it, she gasped. Leonard, you wrote that email to your own son. I had to push him, Leonard yelled, slamming his beer down on the side table. Foam spilled over the edge. He was wavering. He was crying about saving the marriage. He needed to be a man. Diane, he needed to cut her loose before she destroyed him. You destroyed him. I screamed. It was the first time I raised my voice. You gaslit him. You took his insecurity, and you fed it until it ate him alive. You made him believe his wife was and his baby was a bastard just so you could save 10% of your damn trucking company. I slammed the final piece of paper on the table. It was the draft of the civil lawsuit. This is a defamation complaint, I said, my voice shaking with rage. It names Leonard Rivers, Cole Rivers, and Vince Hollister as defendants. It details the conspiracy, the fraud, the emotional distress. If I file this on Monday, it becomes public record. The shareholders will see it. The town will see it. Everyone will know that the great Leonard Rivers is nothing but a sad, manipulative old man who tried to frame his daughter-in-law because he was too greedy to treat her fairly. Cole looked at his father. He looked at the man who had been his hero, his tormentor, his god for 32 years. He looked at the man who had told him to check his plumbing. He looked at the man who had written a fake email to break his heart. Then he looked at me. He looked at the ultrasound in his hand. Did you ever once consider that she might be telling the truth? Cole asked. His voice was broken, a jagged whisper that cut through the tension. Leonard opened his mouth to speak, to bluster, to defend himself, but he looked at Cole's face, then at Noah's disgusted expression, and for the first time in his life, the patriarch of the Rivers family had nothing to say. The color had drained from every face in the room. They were pale, ghosts of the family. They thought they were. The truth had arrived, and it had leveled the house. The silence in the Rivers family living room was no longer the heavy, suffocating quiet of a courtroom waiting for a verdict. It was the vacuum left after an explosion. The air felt thin. The color had drained from every single face, leaving them looking like wax figures melting under the heat of the truth. Leonard sat frozen in his recliner, his hands still gripping the beer bottle so hard his knuckles were white. Diane was weeping softly into a dish towel, her eyes fixed on the floor as if she could not bear to look at the husband she had slept beside for 40 years. Noah looked ill, staring at the brother he had always envied, realizing that the golden child had actually been a prisoner, and Cole. Cole looked like a man who had just been cut open. He stood by the fireplace holding the ultrasound image of our child, his chest heaving with breaths that he could not seem to catch. I reached into my bag and pulled out the final envelope. It was not thick like the evidence folders. It was thin. It was sharp. It contained the future. This is where I stopped defending myself, I said. My voice was steady, devoid of the tremor that had plagued me for weeks. And this is where I start deciding what kind of life my child and I are going to have. I walked over to the coffee table and placed the envelope on top of the defamation complaint. I have already instructed Avery to file paperwork withdrawing my consent to the original divorce terms. I told them she is also preparing an independent petition. It lists in excruciating detail every false allegation made against me, the timeline of the harassment and Leonard's interference in our marriage. It is ready to be filed. Vince Hollister cleared his throat, his eyes darting between me and Avery. Harper, surely we can handle this privately. There is no need to involve the courts now that we know the truth. The truth is not an eraser, Vince, I said coldly. It does not wipe away the last month. It does not wipe away the fact that you helped Leonard draft a strategy to rob me. I turned to Cole. If you want to avoid that petition becoming public record, here are my conditions. They are not negotiable. I held up one finger. First, you will formally withdraw the current divorce filing immediately with prejudice, meaning you can never file on these grounds again. I held up a second finger. Second, you will issue a written notarized retraction of all cheating claims. You will send a copy to my parents. You will send a copy to Owen and Brooke. And you will apologize to them for dragging their reputation into the mud. I will, Cole whispered. I will do it today. I am not finished, I said. Third, you agree to full transparency regarding your mental health treatment. No more secret calls to apps. No more hiding your depression because your father thinks feelings are for weaklings. You get a real therapist. You go to sessions and you sign a waiver allowing me to verify that you are actually going. Cole nodded. He didn't even hesitate. Okay, yes. Then I turned to Leonard. The old man glared at me, trying to summon the intimidation that had worked on everyone in this town for 3 decades. But it was gone. He looked small. He looked like a bully who had finally been punched back. And for you, Leonard, I said, my voice dropping an octave, I have a special condition. You do not dictate terms to me in my own house. Leonard spat, though his voice lacked its usual thunder. Actually, I do, I said. Because if I don't, the state regulators will. I pointed to the document Avery was holding. You will sign a statement acknowledging your role in weaponizing the prenup and using the clinic charges to defraud me of my equity. You will admit that you manufactured the suspicion to force a divorce. I will never sign that. Leonard scoffed. That is admission of liability. If you do not sign it, Avery stepped in, her voice sharp as a razor. Harper will file the defamation suit on Monday morning at 9:00. She will give a recorded statement to the local business journal. And by noon, we will hand Mason's full report, including the emails you forged and the recording of you conspiring to hide assets to the regulatory board that oversees freight and logistics licensing in this state. Leonard's mouth fell open. You wouldn't. She absolutely would, Avery said. Mason's report suggests some interesting accounting practices regarding how you value the company's assets during divorce proceedings. I imagine the IRS would find it fascinating reading. Leonard went pale. The threat to his family was one thing. The threat to his money was entirely another. Finally, I said, delivering the last blow, you will step down from day-to-day control of Rivers Freight and Supply. You will hand operational authority to an independent manager or to Noah if the board agrees, but you are done pulling the strings. The room was dead silent. I looked at Noah. He sat up straighter, looking from me to his father, a spark of something new in his eyes. Possibility. I turned back to Cole. He was still standing by the fireplace. The distance between us measured in feet, but also in 32 years of conditioning and one catastrophic Christmas. This is not about you begging for me back, Cole, I said. I do not know if I want you back. You broke something in me that I do not know how to fix. Cole winced, tears spilling over his lashes. This is about whether you are capable of standing up to the man who taught you to hate yourself enough to believe I would betray you. I said, it is about whether you are a father or just a son. The room held its breath. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the beating of my own heart. Cole looked at his father. Leonard stared back. His eyes narrowed, silently commanding his son to get in line, to defend the family, to be the obedient soldier he had always been. Cole, Leonard warned, his voice a low growl. Think very carefully about what you do next. Cole looked at Leonard. Then he looked at the ultrasound image in his hand. He traced the outline of the baby with his thumb. Then he moved. He took a step, then another. He physically walked away from the fireplace, away from his father's side of the room, and crossed the rug until he was standing in front of me. He did not touch me. He did not dare. But he stood with me. I am done, Dad, Cole said. His voice was hushed, but it did not shake. I am done letting you dictate my fear. I am done letting you make me feel small so you can feel big. He looked at me, his eyes raw and pleading. I will sign whatever you want, Harper. I will withdraw the filing. I will write the letters. I will quit the job if I have to. I choose you. I chose the baby. I choose us. You ungrateful coward. Leonard erupted, leaping from his chair with a roar that made Diane jump. After everything I built for you, you are going to side with the woman who is trying to blackmail your family. She is telling the truth, Cole shouted back, spinning around to face him. For the first time in months, someone in this house is telling the truth. If you sign those papers, Leonard snarled, pointing a shaking finger at Cole, you are out. I will cut you off. I will rewrite my will tonight. You won't see a dime of the Rivers' fortune. You will be nothing. It was the ultimate threat, the nuclear auction Leonard had always held over his head. But before Cole could answer, a voice spoke up from the love seat. If you do that, Noah said quietly. We all turned. Noah stood up, his hand gripping Emmer's. He looked terrified, but he also looked resolved. If you cut Cole off, Noah said, his voice gaining strength, then I am out, too. I won't run the company for you. I won't bring my son around to be poisoned by you. If Cole goes, we'd both go." Leonard froze. He looked at Noah, his spare, the son he had pitted against Cole for sport. He realized in that moment that he had overplayed his hand. He could lose one son and survive, but to lose both, to be left alone in this big house with nothing but his money and his pride. He sank back into his chair. Defeated, the king had no kingdom left to rule. I looked at Cole. He was looking at his brother with shock and gratitude. The triangulation was broken. The cycle was broken. I took a deep breath. The air in my lungs felt cleaner than it had in weeks. "You have the paperwork?" "Avery," I said. "I do." She nodded. I looked at Cole one last time. "You have a lot of work to do, Cole, and you are going to do it alone. I am going back to Chicago tonight. Do not follow me. Focus on fixing your head. Focus on becoming the kind of man who deserves to meet his child." "Harper, please," Cole whispered, reaching out a hand but stopping short of touching me. "Can I call you?" "Not yet," I said. I gathered my folders. I left the draft lawsuit on the coffee table like a live grenade, a reminder that while the war was paused, the weapon was still armed. I signaled to Mason and Jordan. We turned and walked toward the door. Diane was sobbing openly now, but she didn't try to stop me. She knew I had done what she never could. I had burned down the rut to save the foundation. I walked out onto the porch and into the gray Ohio afternoon. The cold air hit my face, bracing and real. I walked down the path to my car, my boots crunching on the gravel. For the first time since I stood in that hallway on Christmas Eve, flattening myself against the wall and listening to my life fall apart, I felt light. I touched the velvet box in my pocket. The story didn't belong to Leonard anymore. It didn't belong to Cole's insecurities. It belonged to me. Whether I let Cole back into the next chapter was a decision for another day. But as I started the engine and watched the farmhouse disappear in my rear-view mirror, I knew one thing for certain. I had walked into the fire and I had walked out carrying the only thing that mattered. That is where this chapter ends. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a roller coaster of emotion, betrayal, and justice. And I hope you felt every twist and turn along with Harper. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a snowy town like Maple Ridge or somewhere warm and tropical? Please leave a comment below with your location so we can see how far Harper's story has traveled. And if you enjoyed seeing the truth come out, please make sure to subscribe to Azad Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Until next time, stay strong and write your own ending.